All right, today I'm going to show you how to create a rustic farmhouse box using only paint and sandpaper. So first, clearly you need a box. You can either buy one or make one out of some wood you have lying around. And then you get some dark paint. I used a dark brown color I had lying around. And you take that paint and you just paint around the box. It doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be completely covered. I like to just cover fully all the corners and the edges because that's usually where you do a lot of the distressing later. So, as you can see, I'm using a vintage paint. I think it was my mother's, so it's probably maybe 20 years old. So whatever works. As you can see, this is a pretty basic thing. In fact, you can get the kids involved, which I will do in a moment. It doesn't have to look pretty. In fact, the rougher it looks, the better it will be. You really just want to make sure that you cover those corners and those edges because that's where you'll get more of that rustic look later on. So there we go, getting the little guy involved. Already got some paint on his sleeve, nice. So yeah, we're just covering that box with the brown. Sometimes you can cover it fully, you don't have to. The next step is to cover it with white paint. As you can see, I had already done 2 layers there. I'd asked my husband to record, but instead he took a picture and I thought he was recording. Anyway, so this is the 3rd layer of paint that I am doing here, and it didn't really take long to let it dry in between. Maybe just 10-15 minutes in between each coat. And as you can see, I'm trying to get that brown to disappear. If you decide to use the color besides white, it's probably going to take less coats of paint. And also some people like the brown to kind of show through. And so if that's the case, then maybe you just do 1 or 2 coats. But I kind of wanted to have a little bit more control over what, I did as far as distressing it. So when you're doing these coats of paint, you really want to make sure that you're covering all the corners, you're using the brush a little bit more formally and in nicer strokes than you were doing the brown. The brown really could have been, going any which way, covering it here, covering it there. But with the outer layer, the outer color that you choose to use, you're going to really want to cover as much as you can and use those straight strokes just so that it looks nice when you're working on it. So this process takes a little bit longer, but once it's done, it's gonna look fantastic. Now I chose to make my box because I kind of liked having the wood be not perfectly matched up, so I kind of had that seam in the middle. You can see there's a little bit of a gap, and that was the look I was going for because it kind of adds to the rustic appearance. So don't feel like your wood has to be perfect. Now once you're done with that, you're going to make sure you do the inside, because if you put a mason jar or something small in there, you're going to be able to see the inside, and you kind of want it to match that rustic look. If you put a plant in there, you might not see it, so it's all up to you whether or not you want to do it, but since you have the paint available. And I also did the brown inside so I could do the same thing with the edges. So once that is completely dry to the touch, you start on the edges and you sand it. I used a fine sandpaper. I would probably recommend using a little bit more of a rough sandpaper. It doesn't take quite as long and doesn't require you to do quite as much sanding or use as much elbow grease as you would. But I only had fine lying around and I wanted to do it today. And this was an evening project, so it was pretty easy to do quickly. So I'm just sanding the edges. I can do them lightly, I can do them really dark. The nice thing about distressing your wood with sandpaper is you really can't mess it up. If you're going for a rustic, weathered look, anything you do will just add more character to your piece. So I turn it on its side, I keep doing the edges. Some edges you'll see I do a little bit darker. You can see it's really dark in some spots. And what's nice is this was a pretty light white wood, but because I put the brown in there, it really has the look of older wood that's been painted with white. And so it looks like I have older wood underneath that's brown and weathered, when in reality it was brand new wood that really isn't that old, but it has that distressed look because I put the brown underneath. Now, once I get in those corners, since I have a double layer there and I have 2 pieces of wood on each side, I do the crack so that I do it. And you can see I fold the sandpaper so that it has kind of a sharp pointy edge, and then I start sanding with that pointy edge. And as you can see, that's making those more, you know, weathered marks that look like, you know, something's hit the piece of wood or it's been, you know, roughed up over time. I'm making it have that look. I like that one right there. So you can do it as much or as little as you want. Some people like it to just look kind of weathered. Some people like it to look really weathered. I kind of like a lighter in between balance, and so I don't do that much. Plus my sandpaper was getting a little bit torn since I used just this one fine piece that I had lying around and had probably been previously used for something else. So I continue to do the distressing, and I'm liking how that's turning out there at the end. As you can see, I didn't paint the bottom. If you're gonna have it on some type of something where you would see the bottom, you would want to paint that, obviously, but I clearly didn't need to. Now I'm doing the bottom edge. I didn't actually paint that brown, or at least I didn't pay attention to painting it brown, so you can see when I sand it, it's really coming out lighter. It's not having that brown underneath. So if you're going to want to do that, you want to make sure that you get all those edges. So we're getting a nice distressed look here. Kind of fun. Keep those corners going. You can fold your sandpaper again and again, because those corners of the sandpaper, the folds will wear down quickly. So you're going to need to change it up so that you have some nice sandpaper to work with. And go back to the edges if you want. If you want to add a little bit more color to the edges. It's looking nice. Nice thing about this is, let's say you're like, oh, it doesn't look quite as rustic as I'd like it to. You just grab your sandpaper and add a little bit more distressing to the sides or the bottom, the top, the insides. Maybe add a few more marks. Check it out, see if you like it. Do I want to add more? Now I go back, look around, and there you have it. Now you put a plant inside and admire your work. Decide if you want to rough it up a little bit more. Here's another one I did with the same technique. So you can do whatever you want. But I hope you enjoyed this tutorial, and come back soon.